This is a Sports Catastrophe production. Hey there, Heather Ho, there's Jeff Cutter down and welcome you to another Sports Catastrophe birthday boy. And the birthday boy for today, March 15th. Well, I know he's dead, but I didn't have anyone else for March 15th. And after this year, there'll be none on March the 15th. But anyway, this guy was the leader of the Toronto Maple Leafs for many years. No, he wasn't Conn Smythe or Harold Ballard. He was Punch Imlach, who died at 69 years old. He was only 69 when he died. I think he was like in his 70s. But anyway, he was born in Toronto and played junior hockey in the OHA for some Toronto teams and enlisted in the Army at World War II. He was actually invited to training camp by the Detroit Red Wings, but he figured he put on too much weight and declined. So he went to the Quebec League to play for the Quebec Aces because the Quebec Senior Hockey League at that time had salaries that rivaled NHL teams and all that. The QSHL was known for many players actually declining to play in the NHL for the better money in Quebec, like Herb Carnegie, although, Herb Carnegie was black and the racist overtones. Anyway, he played for Quebec for 4 years and spent 11 years adding on coach and GM spots to the Aces. Boston hired Imlach to be the GM of the Springfield farm team. Imlach would become head coach, and it looked good that he would be coach and GM of Springfield. Unfortunately, though, Eddie Shore, who was known for running Springfield like a prison camp, if you will, took back control of the team, leaving Imlach without a job, and he was still under contract with the Bruins. So yeah, Eddie Shore's conduct with Springfield is a lot to restore. But anyway, in 1958, the Leafs needed an assistant GM, so they decided to hire Imlach alongside Keen Clancy to be assistant GM from the Boston organization. The Leafs didn't have a GM and went with a committee to oversaw the team's business operations. But by November 1958, he was named the GM, making him the third full-time GM in 40-year history. The next week, he got his first major move as he fired Coach Billy Ray. Ray actually was offered the GM job before Imlach was hired, but turned it down. Imlach was about to make Bert Olmsted a player coach, but he decided to step behind the bench himself. Unfortunately, though, he was a harsh taskmaster who abused his players verbally and physically. And he had a preference for older players because Imlach wanted to give him last chance to Stanley Cup and really ignored much of the youngsters like Frank Mahovlich. I mean, it was natural for the younger players to chafe at Imlach's autocratic coaching style, but still, it was just disastrous at times. However, Imlach took the Leafs from mediocrity in the mid to late 50s to a few Stanley Cup runs and all that, including 1959. Well, that 58-59 season, that famous chase of the Rangers for the fourth and final spot in the playoffs, which was huge. They squeezed in the playoffs. They actually shocked Boston in the first round, and then would face their rivals Montreal in the finals. But Montreal won in 5 games. But despite all that, the Leafs did get to the Cup final in 1960 and lost. But 62, they beat the Blackhawks, who were the defending champions. Ironically, a few months after the 62 Stanley Cup was won, Punch Imlach and them would learn that Bill Barocco's corpse was found 11 years after his accident. Imlach would coach the 63, 64, and 67 Leafs teams, so Imlach is the last head coach of the Leafs to win a cup. He shockingly traded prospects alongside Dick Duff and Bob Nevin to the Rangers for Andy Bathgate and Don McKinney. But even though that Bathgate and McKinney were there for the 64 Cup run, Bathgate actually was gone from the Leafs in 1965. I was like, what the fuck? But anyway, yeah, the problem with that trade for Bathgate and McKinney wasn't because those two were gone. It was the fact that the Rangers' resurgence in the late 60s was played for Bob Nevin, and Nevin sunk the Leafs in Game 6 of the 71 NHL quarterfinals. with a Game 6 goal. And then Dick Duff ended up winning 4 cups for the Habs. Imlach did not like Gary Cheevers, who was a young prospect, and left him unprotected into the intra-league draft that other teams could draft. Kind of like the Rule 5 from baseball. Boston snapped him up, and he became a Boston icon. The Leafs struggled, and Imlach needed to make a trade. So in 1968, he sent Frank Mahovlich, Gary Younger, who was 20 years old, who had the consecutive game streak before Doug Jarvis did, Pete Stamkowski, and the rights to Carl Brewer to Detroit for Paul Henderson, Normie Ullman, and Floyd Smith. Floyd Smith would soon become a coach / GM for the Leafs. Normie Ullman, he was okay for the Leafs. Paul Henderson, yeah, icon, but for Canada, not for the Leafs. He would actually trade Jim Pappen to the Blackhawks in Blackwood, and it backfired. The Blackhawks made him a great player. So anyway, Imlach was asked by Stafford Smythe to give John McClellan the coaching job, but Imlach refused and told Stafford, "You fire me or you leave me alone." Anyway, Mike Walton would walk out on the team. He didn't like Imlach's style, but he returned a week later. Imlach was fired minutes after the Leafs got embarrassed by the Bruins in the playoffs. Anyway, Johnny Bower and Tim Horton both said they would leave with Imlach, but they both came back. Bower ended his career with the Leafs just in 1970, and Tim Horton would leave for the Rangers and Penguins and Sabres. King Clancy was about to walk away after Imlach got canned, but he was persuaded to stay with the team, and Jim Gregory became the GM. Imlach was one of the main bidders to help the Vancouver Canucks in the Western Hockey League and to help Vancouver get the NHL team. So it was like Imlach, Joe Crozier, and Foster Hewitt were going to pool their money and be owners of the Vancouver Canucks in the NHL. But they didn't have the financial resources, and Medicor bought it for $2.8 million. Vancouver gave him a job offer, but he failed to act on it. So he decided to go to Buffalo, the other expansion team in 1970 to be coach GM. And he actually was part of a big move because Buffalo and Vancouver were going to spin a roulette wheel. Whoever won the roulette wheel got to go first in the draft. And Gilles Perreault was basically the consensus number 1. So Imlach took numbers 11 to 20. Vancouver was 1 to 10. The roulette wheel was supposed to land on 1. And Clarence Campbell said, "Congratulations, Vancouver." But Imlach says, "You have to check again." And it was on 11. So Imlach selected Perreault with that number 11 being Perreault's number. And, Perreault still holds every offensive record in Sabres history. And that's weird. Like, Perreault retired in 1987. Unfortunately, Imlach would suffer the first of many heart attacks in 1972 and stepped down as Sabres coach, saying that fatigue would put his health at risk. So Joe Crozier would be named the interim coach and then given the job outright. Imlach, in 1934, famously decided to draft a fictional Japanese player by the name of Taro Sugimoto from the Tokyo Katanas in the 11th round of the draft. Of course, the draft proceedings were hard, pressed, because they were done by telephone, and they would have to listen to every draft pick. All that. The league says that pick is invalid, and the Sabres still was Sugimoto among the team's alumni. However, the Sabres did get to the 1975 Stanley Cup Finals, which was good for Imlach, but bad for him as the Flyers won in 6 games. But the Sabres players would feud with Imlach, much like Imlach's time with Toronto. I mean, Gilles Perreault and Rick Martin stayed out of it, but still, Sabres players were not all that. Imlach was canned by the Sabres December 1978, alongside coach Marcel Pronovost. So anyway, Imlach had nothing better to do. Well, he went back to Toronto July 1979. The only reason why Imlach came back to Toronto was because Harold Ballard, upset with Roger Nielsen's shortcomings as coach, needed somebody. So he offered Scotty Bowman and Don Cherry a chance to be coach GM or something in that capacity. Scotty Bowman did not like Harold Ballard's interferences in everything. And Don Cherry refused because he made a oral agreement with Colorado, a handshake agreement with Colorado, that is, and he couldn't go back on his word. So Imlach was made the right hand man of Harold Ballard, his longtime friend, and you kind of can figure something fishy was going to happen. Imlach said that on his first day of the job, they only had 5 or 6 good players, and the rest of the team needed to be input. So he implemented a dress code. All players must wear a jacket and tie in the Leafs offices. And players were no longer allowed to drink beer on the plane and bus rides back from road games. Okay, fair enough. I can understand that. But Imlach would butt heads with Daryl Sittler, using confrontational tactics to undermine his influence on the team. And Imlach, basically, the major rule was because Sittler had a prominent role in the NHL Players Association. You know, the stuff that's supposed to go again, counter that owner stuff. And of course, Imlach had problems with Alan Eagleson, who was Sittler's agent. So anyway, Imlach wanted to stop Daryl Sittler and Mike Palmentier from appearing on the Hockey Night in Canada intermission show Showdown, which was good and all that. So he failed. And Sittler, he couldn't trade Sittler because Imlach couldn't trade Sittler because of the fact that he had a no trade clause. Sittler said he would waive it for $500,000. Wrongo. So Imlach decided to trade Lenny McDonald to Colorado to get at Sittler and all that. And players said that it was just to undermine Sittler's influence on the team. Sittler removed the captain's C from his sweater and all that. Why not? Punch Imlach wanted to trade Sittler to Buffalo for Gilles Perreault, but Buffalo said no. Obviously, you're not going to trade your icon. He actually rejected an offer from the Flyers that would have traded Rick McLeish and Moose DuPont for Sittler. I mean, geez, the Flyers were going to be willing to give up Rick McLeish. Should have taken it. Anyway, Imlach was named head coach because of Floyd Smith being injured in a car accident and Dick Duff being terrible. So he was coach. Got into the playoffs, 5 games below 500, but they still made the playoffs. However, he named Joe Crozier as his successor. And Toronto almost got Sittler to Quebec, but Imlach suffered yet another heart attack in 1980. Ballard decided to name himself acting GM and actually made peace with Sittler. And Sittler was named captain for the 81 season. Imlach was just ticked off and all that. And Ballard even signed Borje Salming to a new contract, which was weird because Ballard was not really keen on Europeans. And Salming was only signed when Ballard went to jail. However, Imlach was still the GM and all that. But yet, he had to have a third heart attack, September 1981, and got quadruple bypass surgery. Imlach was never officially fired, but he found out his parking spot at Maple Leaf Gardens was reassigned, and Jerry McNamara was made GM. So Imlach never got to return back to Toronto and all that. So Ballard knew that Imlach had a weak heart and fired him. Although that was one of the best moves Ballard made in his lifetime. Unfortunately, Heart Attack 4 happened in November 85 at a casino, and Heart Attack 5 was the last heart attack he would suffer, as he died December 1st, 1987 at the age of 69. He still did well as a coach, 423 wins as a head coach with 4 Stanley Cups, winning 365 times with the Leafs, the most in Leafs history for a head coach. Yes, he is in the Hockey Hall of Fame, for obvious reasons. I mean, as controversial as you are with Imlach and all that, he was effective. He helped the Leafs in the 60s become a prominent franchise, although he wanted to use his 60s tactics for players in the 1970s. It's all about progress, and Imlach didn't really do that well with progress. But, you know what? Hey, he was the last Leaf coach to win a Stanley Cup, so you got to give him some credence, even though his tactics were kind of wrong. Fight me on it. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. I do.